Imagine standing on a sheet of ice so vast, so ancient, that it has no beginning and no end. The wind is not blowing, it is screaming. The temperature drops so low that your breath freezes before it even leaves your lips. The sky above you is a black canvas, and the sun has not risen in 60 days. There is no road. There is no shelter in sight. There is nothing but the cold, the dark, and the silence that presses against your chest like a hand trying to stop your heart. And yet, somehow, people lived here. Not for a season, not for a year, for thousands of years. They built families in this place. They raised children. They told stories. They laughed. They survived. And the world, for the longest time, had no idea how. This is not a story about ice. This is a story about the most extraordinary human beings who ever walked the earth. The ancient tribes of the frozen north and the impossible, breathtaking, deeply human secrets that kept them alive when everything around them was trying to kill them. Long before the cities of Rome glittered with marble columns, long before the pyramids of Egypt cast their shadows over the desert sand, long before civilization, as we understand it, had taken its first breath, human beings had already pushed themselves to the very edge of the livable world. They had crossed mountain ranges, walked across frozen land bridges, and pressed northward into territories so hostile, so brutally cold, that even today, with all our technology, survival there is considered an extraordinary achievement. These were the ancestors of what we now call the Arctic and subarctic peoples, among them the Inuit, the Yupik, the Sámi, the Nenets, the Evenki, and dozens of other cultures scattered across the top of the world from Alaska and northern Canada all the way across Siberia to Scandinavia. Archaeologists estimate that human populations began settling the Arctic regions at least 10 to 15,000 years ago, with some evidence pushing that timeline even further back. These were not desperate, displaced people with nowhere else to go. Many of these tribes had a choice. They could have stayed south. They could have followed the herds into warmer valleys. But something in the human spirit, something restless and curious and almost defiant, drove them northward. And once they arrived in the frozen north, they did something no one would have thought possible. They made it home. To understand how they survived, you first have to understand what they were surviving. The Arctic winter is not simply cold. It is a total sensory war. Temperatures regularly plunge to -40, -50, even -60 degrees Celsius in some regions. The darkness is absolute. In the high Arctic, the sun disappears entirely for months at a time, a phenomenon called polar night. Blizzards can strike with almost no warning, reducing visibility to 0 in seconds, and making it impossible to know which direction leads to safety and which leads to an open crevasse in the ice. The wind chill can make exposed skin begin to suffer frostbite in under 2 minutes. And food, the most fundamental requirement of survival, is incredibly scarce. The frozen ground produces no crops. The trees disappear above the tree line. For much of the year, the only food available is what can be hunted or fished from beneath the ice. Any one of these challenges alone would defeat most modern humans. All of them together, simultaneously, for 6 months of every year, generation after generation. This is what the ancient tribes of the frozen north woke up to every single day. And they did not merely endure it, they mastered it. They developed solutions so elegant, so precisely engineered for their environment, that modern scientists and survival experts still study them in awe. Let us begin with the most intimate secret of all, the secret of warmth. Because in the frozen north, warmth is not a comfort. Warmth is the difference between waking up tomorrow and never waking up again. The ancient Inuit, perhaps the most iconic of the Arctic peoples, developed a relationship with warmth that was almost spiritual in its precision. They understood, thousands of years before modern thermodynamics was invented, that the key to staying warm was not just about generating heat, it was about trapping it. And nothing trapped heat like the very substance that surrounded them. Snow, the igloo, that seemingly simple, domed structure built from blocks of compacted snow, is one of the greatest architectural achievements in human history. Not because it is grand, not because it is beautiful, though there is a quiet, ghostly beauty to a field of igloos under the northern lights. It is remarkable because it works so extraordinarily well. Snow, as a material, is an incredible insulator. It is full of trapped air pockets that prevent heat from escaping. A well-constructed igloo with a small oil lamp burning inside can maintain an interior temperature of between -7 and +16 degrees Celsius, even when the outside temperature is -45. That is a temperature differential of 60 degrees or more, maintained by nothing but compacted snow and the body heat of the people inside. But building an igloo was not as simple as stacking snow into a dome. It was an art form, and it required knowledge passed down through generations. The builder had to know how to test the snow. Not all snow was suitable, as freshly fallen powder would collapse, while the right kind of wind-packed snow could be cut into precise blocks that would lock together and support each other as they spiraled upward. The blocks had to be cut at exactly the right angle, leaning inward as the walls rose, so that the dome would support itself without any internal framework. A ventilation hole had to be placed at the top, just large enough to let stale air out and fresh air in, but small enough that critical heat was not lost. The entrance tunnel was always built lower than the floor of the living space, so that cold air, which sinks, could not easily flow inside. These were not accidental discoveries. These were centuries of accumulated wisdom, tested against the harshest environment on Earth, refined until every detail was perfect. Inside the igloo, life was organized around a small lamp called *kulak, asterisk by the Inuit, a shallow, crescent-shaped stone dish filled with rendered seal fat or blubber, with a wick made from dried moss. This lamp was tended almost exclusively by women, and it was one of the most critical objects in Arctic survival. The kulak did not just provide heat. It provided light in the months of total darkness. It melted snow into drinking water. It cooked food. It dried wet clothing. It was, in every meaningful sense, the heart of the Arctic home. A woman who could keep her kulak burning steadily through a blizzard, who could regulate its flame so that it warmed without overheating, who could stretch a limited supply of fuel through weeks of storms. That woman was not just a homemaker. She was a survival expert of the highest order. Clothing was the second great secret of survival, and here the ingenuity of the ancient Arctic peoples reaches almost incomprehensible levels of sophistication. Modern outdoor clothing manufacturers spend billions of dollars attempting to replicate what this Inuit and other Arctic tribes achieved thousands of years ago using only animal hides, bone needles, and sinew thread. The key principle, which modern Gore-Tex and synthetic insulation technology has only recently managed to approximate, was the layered system. The ancient Arctic peoples wore clothing in 2 layers. An inner layer worn with the fur facing inward, against the skin, to trap body heat in tiny air pockets next to the body, and an outer layer worn with the fur facing outward, to repel wind and shed snow. Between these 2 layers, air circulated in a way that prevented both sweating and freezing, the 2 great dangers of physical activity in extreme cold. Sweating in the Arctic is nearly as dangerous as freezing. If a hunter worked hard, chasing a seal across the ice, and sweated into his clothing, that moisture would freeze the moment he stopped moving, turning his garment into a shell of ice against his skin. The layered clothing system, with its deliberate air circulation, was specifically designed to wick moisture away and prevent this from happening. The craftsmanship involved was extraordinary. Inuit women used stitching techniques so precise, sometimes involving stitches so small they are nearly invisible, that their seams were effectively waterproof. Thread was made from animal sinew, which swells when wet, creating an even tighter seal. Every stitch was a calculation. Every seam was a piece of engineering. And the woman who sewed the clothing was, in the deepest sense, a guardian of life. The materials chosen for clothing were equally precise. Caribou hide was prized above almost all others because caribou hair is hollow. Each individual strand is a tiny tube of trapped air, making caribou fur one of the most effective natural insulators ever discovered. Polar bear fur was used for specific garments, particularly pants worn during the most extreme cold, because its texture repels moisture more effectively than almost any other material. Sealskin, waterproof and dense, was used for boots, called mucklucks or kamiks, that could keep feet dry even when walking on wet ice near open water. Every material was chosen for a specific purpose, and the combination of all of them together created a survival system that modern polar explorers, as recently as the early 20th century, were still copying and adapting. But warmth and clothing, as essential as they were, solved only part of the problem. Food was the other great challenge, and this is where the story of Arctic survival becomes most extraordinary. In the frozen north, the concept of agriculture was simply impossible. The growing season, even in the subarctic, is brutally short. Above a certain latitude, there is no growing season at all. And so the ancient tribes of the north built their entire food economy around animals, an intimate, complex, and profoundly respectful relationship with the creatures that made their survival possible. For the Inuit peoples of the Arctic coast, the seal was the single most important animal in existence. Ringed seals, bearded seals, harp seals, they provided food, fuel for the lamps, material for clothing and boats, and sinew for thread. The hunt for seals, particularly during the deep winter when the sea ice formed a solid sheet across the ocean, was one of the most demanding and skillful activities in the human world. The technique used by winter hunters was called ***, the breathing hole method, and it required a level of patience and sensory awareness that is almost impossible for modern people to fully appreciate. Seals, despite living in the Arctic Ocean, breathe air. When the sea freezes over, they maintain a series of small breathing holes in the ice, surfacing every few minutes to breathe. The hunter had to find these holes, which might be covered by snow, and invisible to the eye, by using a thin probe to feel for the slight hollow above the seal's breathing space. Once a hole was found, the hunter would stand absolutely still over it, sometimes for hours, sometimes for an entire day, holding a thin bone or ivory indicator in the hole, so he could feel the faintest vibration that would signal a seal surfacing beneath him. He could not move. He could not stamp his feet for warmth. He could not make any sound. He simply stood, in temperatures of -30 or 40 degrees, in silence, waiting. And when he felt that tiny tremor, he had perhaps 2 seconds to drive his harpoon through the ice with perfect accuracy before the seal was gone again. This kind of hunting was not just a physical act. It was a meditation. It was a test of every form of human endurance simultaneously. And it was the ordinary, daily reality of life in the frozen north. The Inuit also developed an extraordinary technology for hunting on open water during the brief Arctic summer, the kayak, which we have inherited into modern language as the kayak. This narrow, enclosed boat, built from a driftwood or whalebone frame covered in seal or sea lion skin, was so perfectly designed for one specific purpose, hunting marine mammals in Arctic waters, that it has been virtually unchanged in principle for thousands of years. The hunter sat inside the enclosed cockpit, sealed to the boat by a spray skirt, and could roll the entire vessel upright if it capsized, a technique that modern kayakers still train for years to master. The kayak was silent, fast, low in the water, and perfectly adapted to getting close to seals, walruses, and even whales without alarming them. It was, in its way, as sophisticated as any modern hunting technology. Inland, across the subarctic forests and tundra that stretched from Alaska across Canada and all the way through Siberia to Scandinavia, different tribes faced different challenges and developed different solutions. The Evenki people of Siberia, one of the oldest nomadic reindeer herding cultures on Earth, solved the problem of Arctic survival, not by hunting fixed prey, but by attaching themselves to one of the most remarkable animals in nature, the reindeer known in North America as caribou. The relationship between the Evenki and their reindeer herds was one of the most fascinating and intimate partnerships in human history, a bond that was simultaneously economic, spiritual, and emotional. The Evenki followed their herds across thousands of kilometers of Siberian landscape every year, moving with the seasons, never staying in one place long enough to exhaust the food supply. Their shelters, conical tents called chum, built from reindeer poles covered in reindeer skins, could be assembled and disassembled in under an hour, making the entire community mobile enough to move with the herds whenever necessary. The reindeer provided everything: meat and blood for food, milk for nutrition and fermentation, hides for clothing and shelter, sinew for thread, antler and bone for tools, and crucially, transportation. The Evenki were among the earliest peoples to domesticate reindeer for riding and for pulling sleds, a development that transformed their ability to survive the vast, frozen distances of Siberia. Similarly, The Sámi people of Scandinavia, often called the Lapps, though they themselves prefer Sámi, developed an extraordinary culture across what is now Norway, Sweden, Finland, and the Kola Peninsula of Russia. The Sámi are among the oldest indigenous peoples of Europe, with a cultural history stretching back at least 10,000 years, and their relationship with the reindeer is the cornerstone of their identity. The Sámi developed complex systems of reindeer husbandry, tracking their herds across hundreds of kilometers between their winter and summer grazing grounds, reading the land and the weather with an accuracy that no compass or satellite could replicate. They developed the *lavu*, a portable tent structure remarkably similar to the Native American tipi, optimized for the Scandinavian Arctic environment. They developed skis, and the Sámi word for ski is one of the oldest known references to this technology in any human language, allowing them to move across snow and ice at speeds that transformed both hunting and travel. The Sámi also possessed something that all the ancient Arctic peoples shared, and which was perhaps the most important survival tool of all: a knowledge system of almost incomprehensible depth and precision. This knowledge was not written down. It lived in the minds of the people, transmitted from elder to child through story, through song, through direct observation and experience. It included knowledge of weather patterns, how to read the sky, the wind direction, the behavior of animals, the color of clouds, the sound of the ice, to predict what was coming hours or even days in advance. It included knowledge of navigation, how to find direction by the stars, by the aurora, by the prevailing wind direction, by the pattern of snowdrift and sastrugi on the ice surface. It included knowledge of medicine, which plants, in the brief summer, had healing properties, how to treat frostbite, how to manage injuries far from any other form of help. This knowledge was sacred. It was the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of living at the edge of what is humanly possible, and the people who carried it understood that it was the most precious thing they owned. In many Arctic cultures, the elderly were not simply respected, they were essential. An old Inuit grandmother who had survived 70 Arctic winters knew things that no young person could know, had seen weather patterns and ice conditions and animal behaviors that a younger person had not yet encountered. Her knowledge could mean the difference between a successful hunt and starvation. Her memory was the community's library. And yet survival in the frozen north was never only about physical technique. It was also about the mind, and this is perhaps the deepest secret of all. The psychological challenge of surviving an Arctic winter is extraordinary. 6 months of darkness, weeks of storms that confine entire communities to their shelters, the constant grinding uncertainty about whether there will be enough food to see the winter through, the isolation, the silence. Modern researchers who study polar psychology, the mental effects of long periods of extreme cold, darkness, and isolation, have documented a condition sometimes called cabin fever, characterized by irritability, depression, impaired judgment, and in extreme cases, breakdown. These are the same pressures that the ancient Arctic peoples faced every single winter, year after year, generation after generation. The way they managed these pressures reveals something profound about human nature. They did it through community, through story, through ceremony, through music and laughter. The ancient Arctic peoples were not grim survivors, grimly enduring their circumstances. They were vibrant, creative, deeply social human beings who had developed rich cultural lives specifically to counterbalance the harshness of their physical environment. Among the Inuit, the drum dance, a ceremonial gathering where a single large drum made from a wooden frame covered in walrus stomach or bladder was beaten while a performer danced and sang, was one of the most important social institutions in existence. These gatherings brought entire communities together in the darkness of winter. They resolved disputes. They shared stories of hunts, of travels, of spiritual encounters. They celebrated births and mourned deaths. They reminded everyone that they were not alone. The Inuit tradition of throat singing katajak is one of the most distinctive musical traditions in the world, a form of vocal performance in which two women stand face to face and create interlocking rhythmic sounds, almost like a game, each responding to the other in rapid, breathless alternation. Throat singing served many purposes. It was entertainment, it was competition, it was a form of play, but at its deepest level, It was a way of creating connection, of affirming the bond between two people through the most intimate possible act of synchronized breath and voice. In the darkness of a winter igloo, surrounded by a blizzard, two voices creating that interlocking rhythm together were saying something that went far beyond words. They were saying, I am here. You are here. We are together. We are alive. Storytelling. *unik in Inuktitut, the language of the Eastern Canadian Inuit, was equally central to Arctic life. The great storytelling season was winter itself, when the darkness made other activities impossible and the community gathered inside together. Stories served multiple functions simultaneously. They entertained. They educated children about the proper way to behave, the proper way to treat animals, the proper relationship between human beings and the natural world. They preserved history. They transmitted knowledge. And they provided meaning, a framework for understanding why the world was the way it was, why the Arctic was so beautiful and so terrible, why human beings existed in it at all. Many Arctic cultures had creation stories of extraordinary power and complexity. The Inuit tradition includes the figure of Sedna, the great sea goddess, a being who, depending on the version of the story, was a young woman cast into the ocean by her father or husband, whose fingers were cut off as she tried to cling to the side of a boat, and whose severed fingers became the seals, walruses, and whales that the Inuit depended on for survival. Have you ever wondered how people survived and even thrived in one of the most extreme environments on Earth? We're talking about the Arctic, a place of biting winds, endless ice, and months of darkness. It seems impossible, right? Well, for thousands of years, ancient peoples of the Arctic didn't just survive. They built rich, complex cultures based on incredible ingenuity and a deep connection to their environment. This isn't just a story of survival. It's a story of human brilliance. Let's travel back in time, way before modern technology. The story of Arctic settlement is a long and fascinating one, spanning millennia. We have groups like the Paleo-Eskimos, who first crossed the Bering Strait from Siberia into North America around 5,000 years ago. These early pioneers were masters of adaptation. Imagine arriving in a land where trees are scarce and the ground is frozen solid for most of the year. How do you build a home? What do you use for fuel? These are the questions they had to answer, and their solutions were nothing short of genius. One of the most iconic symbols of Arctic survival is the igloo, or more accurately, the igloo, which in the Inuktitut language simply means house. While we often picture the classic dome-shaped snow house, the term could refer to any dwelling. But let's talk about that snow dome, because it's an engineering marvel. It's built from compressed snow blocks cut directly from the ground. The spiraling, interlocking construction gives it incredible strength. What's truly brilliant is how it traps heat. Snow is a fantastic insulator because it's mostly trapped air. Inside, a simple seal oil lamp and body heat could raise the temperature from a deadly -40 degrees Celsius outside to a relatively cozy 16 degrees inside. A small hole at the top allowed smoke to escape, while a raised sleeping platform kept inhabitants above the coldest air, which sinks to the floor. It was a perfect solution, created entirely from the material at hand. But what about the summer? When the snow melted, people needed different homes. They built tents from animal skins, like caribou, or seal stretched over frames of driftwood or bone. These were lightweight, portable, and waterproof, perfect for a semi-nomadic lifestyle, following the seasonal migration of animals. In other areas, you'd find semi-subterranean houses built with whale bones and turf, dug partially into the ground for extra insulation against the relentless wind. The key was flexibility, using whatever the land provided. Now, how did they find food in a world of ice? The answer lies in an incredibly deep understanding of animal behavior and the natural cycles of the Arctic. These were the original masters of ecology. They knew precisely when and where the seals would surface for air, the migration routes of the caribou herds, and the best spots to catch Arctic char. Hunting wasn't just about skill with a weapon. It was about patience, observation, and a profound respect for the animals they depended on. Take seal hunting, for example. In the winter, hunters would wait silently for hours at a seal's breathing hole in the sea ice. They often used a clever indicator, like a delicate feather, that would move when the seal came up for air, signaling the perfect moment to strike with a harpoon. This required immense patience and an ability to withstand the cold for prolonged periods. The harpoon itself was a brilliant invention, with a detachable head tied to a line. This way, the prey couldn't easily escape after being struck. In the summer, the hunt shifted. People used kayaks, sleek, fast, and silent watercraft to pursue seals, walruses, and even whales in the open water. The kayak is a masterpiece of design. Built with a driftwood or bone frame and covered in waterproof sealskin, it was custom fit to its user. It was so stable and maneuverable that a skilled hunter could even roll it completely over and come back up, a crucial skill in the frigid Arctic waters where capsizing meant certain death within minutes. For larger prey and for transporting families, they used the umiak, a bigger, open boat, also made of skin and driftwood. Every single part of a hunted animal was used. Nothing was wasted. This wasn't just a practical matter. It was a core part of their worldview. The meat provided essential protein and fat, which is crucial for generating body heat. The blubber was a source of fuel for lamps that gave both light and warmth. The skins were turned into clothing, tents, and boat coverings. Bones and antlers were carved into tools, needles, harpoon heads, and even artwork. Sinew was used as thread. This nose-to-tail philosophy ensured that the gift of the animal was fully honored, and the clothing they made was far more effective than many modern winter garments. They pioneered the concept of layering. The inner layer, warm with the fur facing the skin, trapped a warm layer of air. The outer layer, with the fur facing out, repelled snow and wind. Boots, known as kamiks, were made from different types of sealskin, each with unique properties. For instance, bearded sealskin was used for the saws because it was tough and waterproof. The seams were sewn with incredible precision to be watertight. His clothing was a literal lifeline. But life wasn't just about surviving. It was about community. Cooperation was essential. A successful whale hunt, for example, required the coordination of many hunters in multiple boats. The resulting catch would then be shared throughout the entire community, ensuring everyone had enough to eat. This spirit of sharing, or ingenuity, was a fundamental social value. Elders were deeply respected for their wisdom and experience, passing down knowledge of hunting grounds, weather patterns, and oral histories to the next generation. Their spiritual world was just as rich as their physical one. They saw the world as alive, inhabited by spirits that existed in animals, the land, and the weather. A respectful relationship with these spirits was crucial for success in hunting and for overall well-being. Shamans acted as mediators between the human and spirit worlds, performing rituals to heal the sick, influence the weather, or ensure a good hunt. This spiritual connection fostered a deep sense of stewardship for the land and its creatures. The legacy of these ancient Arctic peoples is profound. Their inventions, from the toggle harpoon to the kayak, are some of the most efficient and elegant solutions ever created for a specific environment. Their social structures, built on cooperation and sharing, allowed communities to thrive against all odds. And their deep, respectful relationship with nature offers a powerful lesson for our world today, a world that is often disconnected from the environment that sustains us. When we look at the Arctic today, we see the impacts of climate change threatening this ancient way of life. The sea ice that hunters have relied on for millennia is disappearing, but the resilience and adaptability that defined their ancestors are still alive. The Inuit, Yupik, and other Arctic peoples continue to blend traditional knowledge with modern technology, navigating a rapidly changing world while holding on to their cultural identity. So the next time you feel a cold winter wind, think of the incredible wisdom of the people of the North. They didn't just fight the cold, they understood it. They worked with nature, not against it, and in doing so, they created a vibrant and enduring legacy that continues to inspire awe. Their story reminds us that human ingenuity and a deep connection to our planet are our greatest tools for survival. Thanks for joining me on this journey to the ancient Arctic. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations into human history and ingenuity. Let me know in the comments what part of their survival wisdom impressed you the most. See you next time. The knowledge systems that had taken thousands of years to build began to erode within a single generation. Elders who had spent entire lifetimes accumulating environmental knowledge Knowledge of ice, of weather, of animal behavior, of plant medicine, died without having been able to pass that knowledge on to children who had been removed from their communities. Languages that carried within their grammar and vocabulary an entire model of the world, a model shaped by thousands of years of Arctic existence, began to disappear. And with those languages went knowledge that could not be recovered, because it had never been written down, because it had only existed in the living memory of the people who spoke them. This is the tragedy that runs like a dark river beneath the story of the frozen North. The secrets of survival that took thousands of years to accumulate could be, and in many cases, were destroyed in a single generation, not by the Arctic, not by the cold, not by any of the forces that these peoples had spent millennia learning to master. They were destroyed by the arrival of a civilization that did not recognize their value. And yet the story does not end in destruction, because the people of the frozen North did not disappear. They survived this second winter, a winter not of cold, but of cultural erasure, with some of the same resilience that had always defined them. In communities across the Arctic world, from the Inuit of Nunavut and Greenland to the Sámi of Norway, and Sweden to the Evenki and Nenets of Siberia, there are today active and determined efforts to recover and revitalize the knowledge, languages, and cultural practices that were nearly lost. Young people are returning to traditional hunting and fishing practices, not because they have to, but because they understand that those practices carry within them a way of knowing the world that modern science is only beginning to appreciate. Linguists and community members are working together to document and revitalize Arctic languages before the last fluent speakers are gone. Sámi reindeer herders are fighting in courts and legislatures to protect their traditional grazing territories from industrial encroachment. Inuit climate knowledge, their detailed, generationally accumulated understanding of Arctic ice and weather, is being taken seriously by climate scientists who recognize that it contains observations and patterns that satellite data cannot capture. Because here is one of the most extraordinary and painful ironies of the story of the frozen North. The people who spent thousands of years learning to read the Arctic, who built their entire civilization around an intimate knowledge of ice and snow and cold, are now watching their world change faster than any generation before them has ever experienced. The Arctic is warming at roughly 4 times the rate of the global average. The sea ice that the Inuit hunters learned to read across hundreds of generations is thinning, retreating, becoming unpredictable in ways that their accumulated knowledge cannot fully prepare them for. The permafrost that has been frozen for thousands of years is thawing beneath the communities that were built upon it. The animals whose migration patterns were known and predictable across generations are shifting their routes. The environmental knowledge system that was built over millennia is being tested by changes that are occurring over decades. The hunters who once stood motionless over a breathing hole in ice that was reliably solid are now navigating a landscape that their grandparents' knowledge cannot fully guide them through. And this is not a metaphor. People have fallen through ice that they would, in an earlier generation, have known was safe. Hunters have been stranded by changing weather patterns that did not follow the historical cues their people had relied upon. Communities built on permafrost are finding their buildings sinking into the softening ground. The secrets of the frozen North, the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of human ingenuity, spiritual practice, environmental knowledge, and community resilience are being tested by the most profound environmental challenge in human history. And the people who carry those secrets are watching and naming what they see and adapting, as they have always adapted, but also grieving as they watch a world they have known and loved and understood more deeply than any outsider ever could begin to transform into something unfamiliar. There is a story told in many versions among different Arctic peoples, a story about a time long ago when the world was almost destroyed by cold. The details vary from culture to culture, but the core is always the same. A great cold came, greater than any winter that had come before. The animals hid. The food disappeared. The people were dying. And in this moment of extremity, a small group of survivors, the ones who held the deepest knowledge, who remembered the oldest teachings, who still maintained their relationship with the forces of the natural world, found a way through. Not by fighting the cold, not by trying to defeat winter, but by understanding it, by reading it, by respecting it, by knowing, in the most profound way, how to exist within it rather than against it. This is the secret that runs through the entire story of the frozen north, the deepest secret of all, beneath the igloo and the kullik and the layered clothing and the breathing hole hunt. The secret is not a technique. It is a relationship. The ancient peoples of the Arctic survived not because they conquered their environment, but because they understood it. Understood it the way you understand a parent, or a partner, or a force of nature, so vast and powerful that any attempt at domination is not only futile, but suicidal. They survived because they listened. They observed. They adapted. They remembered. They shared. And they never, for a single generation, forgot that the world that sustained them demanded respect. And that survival itself was a practice, not a destination, but a daily, moment-by-moment act of attention and humility and skill. Imagine standing again on that sheet of ice. The wind is screaming. The temperature is -40. The sun has not risen in 60 days. And now, hear that sound beneath the silence. It is a woman tending her lamp, adjusting the flame with a precision born of 1,000 years of inherited skill. It is a man standing motionless over a breathing hole in the ice, his every sense focused to a single point, waiting. It is children laughing inside a dome of snow that is warmer than the world outside would suggest is possible. It is an elder telling a story in the dark, a story that has been told 1,000 times before and will, if the world is kind, be told 1,000 times again. It is the sound of human beings doing what human beings have always done in the age of the possible, not giving up, not turning back, not waiting for conditions to improve, but building a life, a real and rich and beautiful life, in the hardest place they could find. The ancient tribes of the frozen north did not survive the deathly winters in spite of their humanity. They survived because of it, because of every quality that makes us recognizably, stubbornly, magnificently human. The capacity to learn, to remember, to imagine, to create, to love, to breathe, to tell stories in the dark, and to believe against all. Evidence to the contrary, that tomorrow the sun will rise again. And perhaps the most important question that their story leaves us with is not how they survived the frozen north, but whether we, with all our technology and all our knowledge and all our civilization, have learned enough from them to survive ourselves.